In a nutshell, Microsoft Fabric is a suite of products, services, and/or experiences that are different from each other, but are just one of many steps needed for data analytics. The easiest way to memorize is by remembering that there are 6 experiences. You will mainly hear about and focus on data factory, data engineering, data warehousing, real-time analytics, data science, and of course Power BI. There is one other component that you will hear about called the data activator. Data activator along with real-time analytics is meant for streaming data or Internet of Things or IoT. The one service that you will surely use is Data Factory, meant for ingesting data from any source. The other service you will focus on is Power BI for the building of reports and data visualizations. You can also use Purview with Microsoft Fabric for data governance and compliance. The 4 services or experiences, data engineering, data warehousing, real-time analytics, and data science expose their data to OneLake. We will discuss OneLake later, so keep that in mind as we go forward. Our focus will be data warehouse in this session. If you're using Microsoft Fabric, just like Azure Synapse Analytics, you will have one or more workspaces. The components that make up a workspace are for ingest, train, stage, govern, serve, and for streaming data, a dashboard, a data flow, a data set, etc. The one thing that I keep repeating again and again is that all data rolls up to OneLake. The colors indicate the areas I intend to cover. Before Microsoft Fabric, the service that was used in Azure was Azure Synapse Analytics. Before that, there was Azure SQL Warehouse, and before a data analytics service was in existence, SQL Server was used for data warehousing. We're going to focus on today is how you can use a Microsoft Fabric and migrate existing artifacts that are in Azure Synapse Analytics. The individual services that need to be upgraded are listed here. I don't like to use the word migrate, but instead call it upgrade since you are not going to migrate from individual services, but implement new solutions to mimic the same functionality. The services in Fabric are separate, but they are treated as a single product, so the licensing is simplified. Although the services may be different, the experiences that fall under the Microsoft Fabric umbrella are all similar to each other. In the past, the data was stored in ADLS or Azure Data Lake Storage in Azure Synapse Analytics. The format used was a proprietary storage format. In future, Microsoft Fabric uses an open source storage format, and that is another reason for wanting to upgrade. Keep in mind, under the covers, Fabric stores data in ADLS. The format used by Databricks is called Parquet and Delta Lake, but Microsoft has come up with the new terminology for the open source format used by Microsoft Fabric, and it is called Delta Parquet, a combination of Parquet and Delta Lake. So I have talked about simplified licensing, unified experience, and open source storage, but perhaps the greatest reason for doing an upgrade is OneLake, a service offered by Microsoft Fabric. An organization houses data in a lot of different types of databases and uses them to create reports for decision making. That data can be rolled up to a single OneLake to generate Power BI reports. You already know that OneLake is offered by Microsoft Fabric, but I would also highlight that only one instance of OneLake is possible, which is a single version of the truth. Also remember that data in OneLake is read-only, and writes cannot be used to write back to the data sources. The data workflow we currently have includes ingest, stage train or consume, and lastly publish or serve. Ingest is where you copy the data from internal or external sources. Then you stage the data or use by other applications or machine learning. You train a machine learning model or consume the data that you have staged. Finally, you publish reports or serve the machine learning models to leadership or line of business applications. When you talk about the Microsoft Fabric platform, you will hear software as a service quiet frequently. The reason for using software as a service is because there is no infrastructure provisioning or maintenance involved, which essentially means that you don't have to manage any infrastructure for your analytics solution, and because you are not using any infrastructure, you don't need to have any separate licenses. The last reason for calling Microsoft Fabric a software as a service is because it just works once you create it. You do not have to do anything additional for it. Just a few clicks on the portal, Microsoft Fabric gets created, and that's it. The second sentence that you will hear a lot is that it's analytics for everyone, and that really means that although there are different screens and experiences for different roles or personas such as a developer, data engineer, data scientist, data analyst, or report designer, they are all alike with slight differences. Microsoft Fabric is also called the OneDrive for data, and the reason for that, you can view data from OneLake using the Microsoft Windows Explorer on your desktop machine. It requires installation of a separate component called the OneLake Explorer. It's free and you can search for it on the web to get the download link. One thing to remember is that you will only see the data that you have access to the OneLake. From now on, I wouldn't mention data activator and real-time analytics. I will just focus on the remaining services on your screen. I mentioned the term data warehouse a little while ago, but there is another term, Lakehouse. You can create a lakehouse using the data engineering experience of Microsoft Fabric, and it comprises of both structured and unstructured data. Structured meaning tables and unstructured meaning files. So if you are ingesting JSON or Parquet files from your vendor, you will store them in a data lakehouse. Also remember is that the data in a lakehouse is read only, so you cannot change it, whereas in a warehouse in the data warehouse experience in Microsoft Fabric, the data is structured. It comprises of tables only, and the data in those tables is for both read and write operations. So you can do select but also inserts, updates, and deletes. There is a decision guide for Lakehouse versus Warehouse at the hyperlink on the screen. As of the creation of this video, the DevOps capability for Microsoft Fabric is under development. You can go to the link on your screen for a sample of a DevOps pipeline that you can communicate to your stakeholders. Before I move to the demo, I want to give a simple example of what a typical analytics architecture will look like. In the architecture diagram on your screen, the data is ingested from an external vendor's web service using Azure pipelines in Synapse Analytics. The second step is to load the data in a SQL pool from where it is staged. The staged data in a database can be used to create visualizations using Power BI or can be queried to a web application. Generated visualizations or web application UI output can be delivered to users of the application in the organization. Let's take a look at how this architecture would change if Microsoft Fabric were used. This is the architecture diagram that you have already seen. In the new architecture using Microsoft Fabric, the data is ingested using Data Factory from where it is loaded in a data warehouse. The data staged in the data warehouse can be used by Power BI or a web application to communicate outputs to users. Note that the Data Factory, Data Warehouse, and Power BI are all part of Microsoft Fabric. Depending on the business requirements, the architecture might change slightly if data science or the use of Azure OpenAI is required. If you look at swim lane 3, in the consumer step, the data in the data warehouse is used to train the machine learning model using the data science experience in Microsoft Fabric. The model is used to generate inferences or predictions that are submitted to the web application. Also, business data in other organizational databases can be used by OpenAI to produce artificial intelligent JSON responses for the web application. The outputs from the machine learning model and Azure OpenAI communicate outputs to end users through the web application or Power BI reports. The 4 steps of the data workflow were illustrated earlier. With Microsoft Fabric, each stage can be modeled using a different experience. Data Factory for ingest, Data Warehouse for stage, Data Science for train or consume, and Power BI for publish or serve. For the architecture diagram, the Data Factory experience can be used to ingest data from the external source and make it available to the data warehouse. The data warehouse experience can be used to model fact and dimension tables using SQL or transact SQL plus vOrder. We will cover vOrder in the next few slides. The data science experience can be used to predict outcomes. And finally, Power BI can be used to generate insights and visualizations. vOrder is a capability introduced in Microsoft Fabric that is used to speed up operations on Delta Parquet using optimized writes. The capability is enabled by default, and it can also be used by the data frame writer in Python code as shown on your screen. The first highlighted section is where you will specify an option for your data frame. The second highlighted section is where you will enable vOrder, and in the third highlighted section, you will specify the schema and table names to use. Remember that vOrder is created and owned by Microsoft, and its source code is not freely available. It is used primarily in Microsoft Fabric and Apache Spark, and it is used in write operations. In contrast, zorder is open source, used by Azure Databricks, and used in read operations. Let's look at what the data warehouse experience looks like in Microsoft Fabric. I have created a workspace called MS Fabric Workspace. I'm currently in the Power BI experience shown by the Power BI icon in the lower left-hand corner. Click on the icon and select Data Warehouse from the menu. I am now in the Data Warehouse experience shown by the icon in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. The 4 tiles at the top of the screen represent the operations that you can perform. I will create a new warehouse by clicking on the first tile. I can specify a new name for my warehouse and click the Create button. A new data warehouse will be created. Before I go, I want to leave you with a few items. It is highly recommended that you enable the Microsoft Fabric trial in your tenant and try out the new analytics capabilities. You should also document and communicate analytics requirements that you try. Microsoft Fabric is in public preview right now, but integration with Azure DevOps and possibly with GitHub is on the cards. Generative AI capability using Power BI Copilot is something you should look forward to. Finally, the security model called One Security will also be included at the time of release of Microsoft Fabric. Thank you for listening.